Hello, and you are welcome to the Inside the Autism Classroom mini-series hosted here on the Unfiltered Autistic podcast by myself, who you'll hopefully know by now as Amanda McGuinness, the host of the podcast. And this week, I'm joined by an absolutely phenomenal lady that I have known since, I'm not going to reveal my age here, since I was very young, but she was much younger than myself because I'm a touch older than Elaine. But I'm here joined by experienced autism class teacher, Elaine Fitzgerald. Elaine is also, I suppose, a relative of mine as well through marriage, and then also is somebody I went to primary school with and who I've always had, I suppose, a long-standing admiration for. But even going back to when I was a young child myself, I always remember Elaine from, we went to Derry Wash National School together. Elaine was always known as a phenomenal singer because she is, but also what I remember is always just the kindness and the empathy that you had for everybody in school, and you were just the loveliest human being, and that has never changed. So I suppose we're here to chat about, I suppose, starting an autism class or becoming an autism class teacher. And I suppose Elaine is the expert on this podcast series. I'm here more as the avid listener more than anything. So I'm going to hand over to Elaine now, who'll talk a little bit more about herself and give herself a proper introduction. So Elaine, you're welcome to the 2-hour mini series, I suppose, this week on the podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I am very excited and I'm a little bit nervous about starting off in this, but thanks so much for asking me. You're saying you're a huge fan of mine. I'm a massive fan for so long, since Little Puddin started, and watching you closely. And I remember looking up all your fabulous resources and just been sharing them on mainstream for years. So to be here is a bit of a pinch me moment. And also, what do they call it? Imposter syndrome. You know, when you feel like you've done so much and you've learned so much, but there's still a bit like, there's people who know more than I do, and there absolutely is, and are far more experienced. But I have had a super 2 years in the autism class. I have been supporting autistic students for years in the mainstream as well, and in SET. And then when my opportunity came up to start in the autism class in Derry Wash, I jumped at it, and I have had a super 2 years. And I've just finished the postgrad in ATU St. Angela's in autism studies. So I feel like I've gotten so much practical information, so much practical experience, and then I've gotten all the research as well behind everything, which is very exciting for a little nerd like me. So yeah, I'm delighted. Thank you so much. And I'm teaching since 2012 in Derry Wash, a past pupil, and they'll never get rid of me now at this stage. And I'm very lucky with the school I have and the support I have. And I also spoke to the parents of my class before I did this, just to be sure that they were comfortable with it. So thanks to them for giving me the green light and the thumbs up, as they always do. Such great support. So thanks to everybody, and I'm excited to get going and hope I can help somebody, one person. If it's helpful to one person, it'll be worth sitting down and having a chat.
You absolutely will. And I suppose for anyone listening to the podcast, in this scenario for this podcast, I'm going to try and I'll never be able to impersonate a teacher because you're just phenomenal human beings. So I'm going to pretend I'm a teacher. So I'm going to ask Elaine questions throughout the podcast over the next series of days. Questions that if I was in an autism class for the first time as a teacher, what might be things I need to know. And Elaine, as the expert by far on this, I suppose, mini-series, will be able to give advice. So if you hear me asking very particular questions, because I'm taking over the role of, I'm a new teacher, what do I need to know? And I suppose we're going to start today, I suppose, all about maybe planning or getting started in an autism class. I just wanted to give a shout out to Derry Wash National School, because I think they were the first in Castlebar. Isn't that what you said earlier, Elaine, to have an autism class? Yeah. So that is pretty phenomenal. So huge shout out to Derry Wash National School. So I suppose we'll get going. I suppose, Elaine, where do you think, as a teacher, if I was starting in an autism class, say, this coming September, where do you think is someplace my frame of reference should be going right now? Think about what do I need to think is the most, say, number one priority for right now if I'm getting ready to get started in an autism class?
I suppose aside from training that hopefully you could access previous to that, and I think we're going to talk about training at a later date, but I saw outside of training, I would say that the first thing I did was chat to the parents, and the parents are the first port of call. They're the primary educators at the end of the day. I had a chat with them, explained that I was going to be taken over, just so they could see me and know who I was, because obviously a change is scary for everyone. It's scary for the kids, scary for the parents, scary for the adults in the room, you know. So I thought that was the really good first step, just to have a chat and say, look, this is who I am, this is my hope for the kids, and I need your assistance, and I'm going to need your collaboration, and that has worked really well. And then to get kind of more concrete information off the parents and any previous educators the kids would have had. So if they've come from if they've come from the school, I took over a class of second class, third class and fourth class kids. So then I spoke to their previous teacher, mainstream and the autism class teacher, about where they're at, and we had a bit like a handover. Then I spoke to the parents, obviously, and then of course if you've got junior infants coming in, you're going to want to go back and go to the early intervention class teacher or the preschool teacher, whoever is the relevant body, who knows them best, because everything is going to boil down to that individual child. And you need to go and source the most individual information you can, because everything is going to have to be framed around that child. And that's why it's so lovely to have 6 kids, and that you can give that time and you can give that special attention to each one. So that would be my first protocol. And then, you're obviously going to have a look at reports and see kind of what the recommendations are as well. But for me, it would be just to talk to somebody first and talk about what they like and dislike. Reports can often be old and a little bit dated. It can be for a 4 or 5-year-old, and you now have a 9-year-old. So what do they like now? Things change over time, and a child is obviously going to change. So that would be the main one. And then after that, you want to set up your classroom. I decided to go for a kind of a low arousal approach. I was looking at different NCSE documents, and I know some even more up-to-date stuff has come out since, just about doing like a sensory profile of the room and like a checklist of what you could change, what's too much, what's too little, so there were like individual desks kind of in it, individual units in the classroom. So I decided to remove those and have more like a collaborative. So I kind of put it into areas of, like the work with teacher area and the play and choice area. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to stay there or anything, but it's just nice to have structure, I think, for the kids. And they do enjoy certain areas, and they know that they kind of, they can have a snack here or whatever. So as I said, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't police that at all. It's not like, oh, no, you don't do that there. But it's just to give them the structure if that's helpful for them. So that was the main thing, setting up the classroom, getting to know the SNAs as well. I think it's so important that you're going to have with you, because you are going to be a unit, a team unit. I know we removed the word unit for the class, which is I'm a huge fan of. It's a class, that's it. But the gang, the team is so important. So they would be my first steps, preparing to go in, I suppose.
Can I ask you, say, if I was ever lucky enough to be a teacher and I was going into the autism class for the first time, you've made a great point there, say, first of all, about, that collaborative nature of not only the relationship with the parents, but with the SNA, and then also setting up the physicality and the structure of the autism class itself. But say, if I go back to, if I'm the new teacher, listen to this podcast, and you're like, okay, great. So I need to find out really key information from the parents. And this is probably the more obvious things that we might think of as an intake form. But is there anything that stands out to you of maybe your first experience of taking over an autism class, something that you thought after, I should have asked that information, or you found yourself during the year oh, should have asked that. That would have been great if I picked that up earlier. Is there any kind of standout questions we know all the general ones that we think everyone would, was there anything particular that you've picked up along the way you thought that would have been a useful question to have asked early on?
I suppose something that I have now, it's like what's the word I'm looking for? It's a communication form that goes between my class and the mainstream. And on it, there is what do I look like when I'm regulated and ready to learn? Because that's so individual to each child. What do I look like when I'm a little bit wobbly, getting a little bit dysregulated? So actual physical signs, words that might indicate, that I'm struggling a little bit and I need to be removed, or I need to be given a break, or something that, and also guide of what I need. So, and then what do I look like when I'm kind of really dysregulated and I really need support? I need, to reduce language and everything. So going back, I probably would have asked that. I didn't know enough to ask. I should have said, what, to use very basic language, what does your child look like when they're feeling a little bit wobbly? How do I know? Because that takes a while to know in a child. So I probably would have done something like that, if I'm honest, so just an idea of, especially when they're going into mainstream, and there's always that risk, if it's not meaningful, that there could be masking going on, and that can bring its own stuff. And oftentimes the teacher's not there when they're in mainstream. They have an SNA supporting them instead. So I can't see that, I can't see the change. So so when they are starting to go into, if there is inclusion happening in mainstream, I like to go in the first few times to see how it looks and see how the child is doing, basically. And then after that, once I'm happy that it's happening okay and everyone is happy, then the SNA obviously goes and supports them. So that's going off me on a tangent as usual, but that's basically what I'm trying to say, is that I would kind of ask what your child looks like when they're at this point, and yeah, so that should be what I would ask.
And then in relation to the collaborative nature of the teacher and SNA relationship, you said at the start, so maybe I'm an autism class teacher going in for the first time. I've met my SNAs nearly as in terms of time frame in around the same time I'm meeting my children that are going to be in the classroom. So how do you, if you were to say to a new teacher, listen to the podcast, what are some things that you might do to say build that relationship with your team of SNAs? Is there anything that stands out to you that you think, if I was a teacher starting all over again in autism class, these are the things, these would be, say, 2 must-dos that I would definitely say would be useful to build that relationship with the SNAs?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I cannot let the time pass without mentioning the two ladies, Tracy and Siobhan, that I have, because they are awesome. And we have some crack. You have to build a good relationship. You have to have the crack. Your relationship and your, I suppose, regulation is so important for the children, for co-regulation, and to keep them steady. So we look after each other and we look out for each other, and we have awful crack, which I think is desperately important. And we model good relationships too in our own way. So the first thing I would do is to obviously meet them, have a chat. But I think it's really important to get an SNA's input. And I do as often as I can, especially if some of them, like one of the ladies that was with me, she had previously been in the class. So she knew, she had seen things that worked and seen things that the kids really loved. And she gave me lots of ideas. And I asked their opinion about setting up the room and did I think this would work? And, they have the patience, two saints, because every Monday when I come back from a course, I'd be like, right, they just have to wait for me and my new daft idea to come to fruition. So, you have to build up that trust. And I think it's very important in the job to make sure that they know that you're willing to do anything that they do. That it's very important that we're all on the ground, we're all working, we're all doing everything we need to do to support the child. And for me then, because it's very hard to plan for an SNA. Someone said, do you have an SNA timetable? I thought, I don't even have my own timetable. I don't know where to start. So no, I don't have an SNA timetable. It took me the guts of a year, I would say, to get a proper one up and going. So what I did was, instead, we just sat down, had a meeting, and I basically talked about the ethos of my room, of my classroom. We always mainstream SED didn't matter, but kind of what my intention was and what I wanted to do in terms of building relationship, reducing anxiety, and then building on language. For me, that was a big priority to make sure that, like, if kids have the language to express themselves, then they're going to be able to, there's going to be less frustrated, and then they're going to be reducing anxiety, and it has a big looped effect. So yeah, so we talked about that. That was really how I started, in terms of building ethos, and then just getting on and having the crack and working really hard. And they work so hard. And so that would be my main advice from a practical
And
point of view.
actually, I recently met with, I was very lucky to have Angela Cummins on the podcast, and she made a great point about it. She works in an incredible autism class in a school in Dublin, and she made the point in relation to the collaborative nature of the teacher and the SNA. She said that she found it really important that the SNAs felt very valued, in that their input was equally as valuable and their insight. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that? And say, if it's a teacher listening that's thinking, oh, like, should I be including that? I'm the teacher, they're the SNA. What do you think about that?
I totally agree. And I would always have asked them, do you have any ideas, even in terms of, targets? Is there anything you feel like we should work towards for that child? And they would, have really amazing ideas, or even ideas about a school tour or class trips. What do you think the kids would benefit from? We try to do things that revolve around some things for life skills, some things just for a bit of fun, and they would have brilliant ideas where, especially when your head is just exhausted and you're up to your head in paperwork, and they just come out with the most amazing stuff. So I do desperately try to make sure that they do feel valued. And it is such, I think there's a real element of the collaborative piece with the SNA and everybody, and then the whole school. I think everyone needs to kind of be on board as well. But yeah, it is something that's really important for me. The two ladies I work with, we have seen an awful lot of lovely wins, and really the two SNAs in your room are going to be the ones that really understand those wins, and they will celebrate them with you so much. When a child does something small that you've been waiting for a year to happen, and the rest of the gang in mainstream are going to be so delighted, but the two that have seen them all year are going to be buzzing on a level that only the three of you understand. And that relationship is just amazing.
Gosh, that's just, even I'm obviously a parent of 4 autistic children, so even just to hear, like, the depth of the knowledge, but also the empathy and the compassion, but also the belief in the students that you have and your SNAs have is just phenomenal. And obviously the staff in mainstream as well. I suppose just thinking about the students that we're talking at the moment about relationships, do you think it's a priority for, say, a new teacher and SNAs coming into the autism class for the first time or coming back after a number of years, if they're saying like, what's okay, priorities, get information, build a relationship with the SNAs, do you think building a good relationship and understanding of the students should be like top of the tier of info, or like what's the next things we should be doing now? Should we be focusing immediately on planning for academics, or should we be thinking about getting that student to have felt safety with me and for me to be that pillar for that student? Do you think does that factor in here as well, say as kind of the initial things to do?
Completely. And I think when I started first, and I joined all these Facebook groups and forums, and I put in, can anyone tell me what, how do I start, or what kind of things do I do on my first day? And everyone replied completely accurately, you just need to focus on building relationships. And I was like, but what will that look like on a schedule? So I had to get over that side of things. Like I'm very lucky. I went to Lourdes for years as a volunteer with children and young adults with additional needs. And you were just fired into a room with a load of kids that you didn't know and they didn't know you. So you just had to figure out what made them tick, basically. Figure out what they liked. There was no documents. There was nobody to tell you. We got no real kind of handover. You were just, hi, I'm Elaine. And some of the kids that we supported were speaking and some weren't. So you just had to find out if I do, we would have a lot of younger kids. If I do peekaboo, do they like it? They don't? Right, okay, tick, that's not working. Next thing, so all it was building relationships with them, to the point when the 5 days were over, leaving Lourdes, we were in bits. We were so attached. They were so attached, So that is something that I would say comes naturally to myself. And I love that bit. That is the easiest for me. That is the priority. And it is the easiest part for me, is just having the crack with them. I think there can be, especially a lot of new teachers, being honest, there can be a lot of fear about going into an autism class. It's a whole different setting. It's nothing, none of us are trained to do it, and there can be an awful lot of fear going into that. And I, would say, just if you go in and just focus on having a bit of crack, having a bit of fun, having a bit of play, obviously trying to figure out bits that they like. A lot, my crew love animals, over and above, they love animals. So that was somewhere to start, to make sure that we had something like that, and we had games and we had toys and everything, things like that. But it is just, sometimes people say, but I don't know how to do it. So, but just hang out with them, lie on the beanbag beside them, lie on the rocking chair, just have a chat. If they like drawing, sit and draw with them. If they like playing make believe or like to play with puppets, you sit down and you play with puppets. But that's a real struggle when you're coming from mainstream. And so you're so used to being like, I have a curriculum to follow and I need to get this done and I have maths to do. And I always do maths at 9:30. You have to just forget everything you've learned about mainstream and focus on sitting down. And there's going to be an element of, like, I often think if anyone looked in, we got these lovely rocker chairs that a parent had gotten donated to the school. And I'm so, the whole 5th and 6th class passed the window one day and I was lying on one of the rockers going back and forth with one of the girls. And they looked in as if to say, what is she doing? I'm just not perfectly clear. But it's not, to the naked eye, it's not. And you can feel guilty. There's a lot of teacher guilt there of sitting down and chilling out with somebody. But actually, if you ask me, how do you build relationships? Sit down, hang out, chill out, have the crack, and just be. And don't be afraid, and don't overtalk, says I'm a great one to say, don't overtalk, but just sit there. So sometimes they just don't need to talk at them like this, so that would be my experience of building relationships.
And just something that occurred to me, because I would have got a kind of, every summer would say there's incredible teachers or maybe SNAs or tutors going out to say provide, I don't know if it's still called this now or not, I'm going to call it July provision. And I'd often get messages saying, everyone always says, like, build rapport with the people who are going into their homes or bringing them out and about, but how do you do that exactly? So say if it's a person, it's primarily the questions I'd get on Instagram would be if the person is non-speaking or uses an AAC device. So say, would you have 2 or 3 tips for, say, teachers that might be a little bit apprehensive apprehensive, maybe they haven't worked with people before that are non-speaking, or you say AAC. So anyone listening, AAC is like it's an augmentative way of communication through like a speech device, I'll call it. In our house, but Connor calls his speech device a talker, my eldest boy. So would you have any, say, one or two or three tips there for if there's anyone listening saying, okay, I know I've got to build a rapport, but what if the person is either A, say non-speaking, or B, when I try to engage with them, they seem to be a little bit resistant? Is there anything there that maybe you'd have experience on you could maybe feed into, maybe?
With someone who's non-speaking, they can't tell you when they're uncomfortable. They can't verbalize that. So I think you need to be really, really mindful of their physical cues. You know, like there would have been a situation where one of our students would have really kept to himself, and I had spoken to the SNAs, and I was like, we need to just give him space because he is clearly trying to tell us he doesn't want to be crowded. He needs to watch us and trust us, you know, and that was as much to do with his regulation as everything else. But, you know, I think when you have somebody who's not speaking, you need to make sure that you're taking their physical cues into account and, you know, using their method. You know, I always talk about the total communication approach, not that I invented it, but whatever they use, you use. I always found what really helped build relationships with my children in the class, who would be, you know, they would have like gestalt phrases and stuff, and they would often say, and that's a rule when you come into my room, anyone who volunteers or anything like that, you have to repeat the phrase. So if someone comes up and says shark, bullfrog, yak, then you have to say shark, bullfrog, yak. And that really, it's like we can't expect them to speak our language if we don't speak theirs. You know, it's like a trust thing. So that'd be something I'd say if there are like scripts or any gestalt phrases like that, and if somebody says them to you, then I would say repeat them back. That should be my experience. Now, if they don't like that, they won't be on making that clear, you know. So again, it's so individual, it's so hard to answer, you know. But I would say as well, sometimes you've got some kids who are non-speaking, you need to be kind of more on the physical side, as in like, you know, making a bit of a goose of yourself, I would say, you know, kind of tripping up or playing a silly game or pretending to fall off the chair or something that makes them go, look, this is just, you know. I think half the time my students are looking at me like, what is wrong with her? She's just always messing, you know. But so that would be, I don't know how practical those tips are, but that's what's worked in
No,
my
I think there.
experience.
What that says to me is make sure they have felt safety. It says to
Mm-hmm.
me, follow their lead, respect the way they're trying to communicate with you. If they need distance, respect the distance, and when they're ready, and if they become ready, they will allow you into their safe space. So I think everything you said there is exactly what I would do as a professional working in this space, but also as a parent more than anything of multiple, I suppose, boys in particular that were at one point or another in their lives non-speaking or would have high support needs, because some of my boys have intellectual disabilities. So I suppose we've covered a few different pieces there. What then next do you think would be, say, if you're the new teacher going into the autism class for the first time, do you think would be the next priority for you? If you've been covering all these bases, what might, say, be the fourth thing you might be considering now?
So I suppose I'm going back to what I found really hard, and that's just me being honest. As I will say in every part of the series, that there are people who know more and there are people who have more experience than me, but I can only talk about my own experience, and it's not gospel, but it's just how I felt. And you know, I struggled with the schedule. You know, I couldn't pick a timetable. I couldn't figure out what a timetable might look like, and I'm very lucky to have experienced colleagues who sent on theirs, but it didn't mean anything to me. I just couldn't make any sense of it, and I really wanted my own, and I had this thing in my head. And then you know, I think it's a phrase and I'm going to say wrong now, which is like, you know, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time. So I probably have that wrong, but I just remember thinking, why am I trying to plan for a week? Like, why don't I just plan for the day? You know, when you do that, and if you have second class or third class or any mainstream class or in SET, I'd always write out a plan for the day. Just what I'm going to do. And that's what I did. I just decided not to panic about doing up this full fabulous timetable to stick on the board behind my room, behind my desk. I just decided, right, what are we going to do first thing? So if you're going in first thing and you don't know the kids from Adam, I would start off with, you know, teaching routines is really important. Okay, first thing, I'm going to have my little visual schedule. And, you know, some of my kids have visual schedules, some of them have written. I didn't know that until I got to know them. So I started off with big, very basic visual schedule. Um, And that's what I started, because I suppose the one thing that we talk about a lot of time with visuals, and what I learned massively from postgrad, is that when you are doing any sort of visual, anything, you need to, that visual should be appropriate for the child at their most dysregulated, not when they're flying, so they need to be able to access that on their worst day. So you always plan their visuals for their worst day. That's not to be negative, but that, they might be able to, some of my guys that have a written schedule, but I always have visual schedules there just in case, because that's really important. So I started with things like hanging up my coat, um, putting away my bag, that kind of thing. And again, that's very age dependent. You might have junior infants, and that's a whole different ballgame. But this is what I started with. I called them morning tasks, and I just had a visual of somebody putting their coat up, that kind of thing. And then it was a thing of maybe like sensory play or choice, as I would always have as messy things. My crew love a good mess, and they love shaving foam with a tough tray and all those things. They would have been the kind of the starting point, and keeping it very, very structured but very loose at the same time. I know that doesn't make a whole pile of sense, but I have to give them some sort of routine. But at the same time, if they decided to pull out their lunch and eat something, like, there was no bother, that doesn't bother anybody in the slightest. They obviously want food, like, that's fine. But it's just, I suppose the structure is there for the ones that need it, and the flexibility is there for the ones who need it too. And that is the best I can come up with, I suppose. So, like, starting with simple visual schedules, only planning for one day. And I remember going through it on that first day being like, no, that was a disaster, absolutely never doing that again. And I had a whole different ball game the following day. And that's why the relationship with the SNA is so important, because you're like, so everything we did yesterday is now in the bin, so we must change it. And they have to keep moving with you. So that would be the first thing. So teaching you routines as well, and snack and playtime and things like that, so they just know, just to keep them safe in and out of the yard, things like that.
I suppose it reminds me of something Dr. Ross Green, I was watching and listening, was on YouTube, a podcast he did recently where he spoke about developmental variability. So he said it's a nice way of saying, even if everyone in the room is autistic, everyone's at a different stage in their life. Meet them where each person is at. And what you've just described is exactly what his recommendation would be. Like, we could say, oh, visuals work for all autistic people. Like, I'm autistic. Visuals do work for me, but they have to be in a very specific way. Doesn't mean they're not valuable to me, or I do develop them differently for my sons or for people I work with. But it's exactly as you say, flexibility is there for those that need it. The structure is there for those that need it. And you're meeting everybody, no matter their age, but where they're at right now. So whether it's the person that is learning to hang up the coat, or learning to maybe just have fun when they come in the morning with the sensory tray, whatever it is. So that's really, I suppose, important, I suppose, for anyone listening, that you think about it. Just because it's useful for autistic people, you still have to have that. I always do gestures with my hands, like I for individualization. So you're still always thinking of, but what does this, I know this works generally, what does this person need? So that's another great insight. I wish I could keep, every time I put on my glasses, I see a glare, so I keep taking them off. So I'm thinking maybe our final maybe point for today might be, if you're planning for mainstream. So for some, I know for myself, I'll give you an example. As a parent, I obviously have had 3 children. They're all in autism classes at the moment. Some are in secondary school, some are in primary. But I know at one point, for one of the boys in particular, who might have had the most capacity potentially to be able to tolerate, and I'll use the word tolerate, because I always think it's great if you can go into mainstream and you like mainstream. But also, for me, it was never a goal that mainstream was like the hierarchy of, we get to mainstream. If that's where he was comfortable, that would be great. But if it wasn't, that was fine too. But say if you're a teacher coming in, you're like, okay, I'm coming into the autism class, I want to be really inclusive. Okay, so I need to plan now immediately as well. How am I going to make it possible, say, if I was a student again, how is Elaine going to make it possible? Say, if I'm going to give an example, one of the profiles of the boys here, if I'm non-speaking, I can be quite dysregulated time to time. And you're thinking, should you be thinking immediately, because you're meeting me for the first time, okay, now I also need to plan, how do I get Amanda to be in mainstream, because to be truly inclusive, is that what that means? Or should they be thinking of that maybe further down the road?
I suppose for me, mainstream has to be meaningful. That's the word that rattles in my brain when I think about it. Going up for the sake of saying, well, yeah, he went up for 5 minutes today, wasn't that great? It's not meaningful, and therefore it's pointless. So, and I think that if there is any part of inclusion in mainstream that is causing behaviours of concern or causing dysregulation, no, something has to change. Either it's the wrong topic, the wrong subject, they're not regulated enough to be there, they just don't want to be there. Some children, as you said, will love it. They'll be buzzing to go in and they'll enjoy it, and some kids absolutely won't. And forcing it is just going to cause havoc for the child. and everybody involved. It's not healthy. So I would say, people have asked me in the past, how quickly would I get them into mainstream, or how would it work? And I would have always said, there's no rush. If that's how I feel, that's my opinion. Play is a nice place to start, like your child-led play in the infant side of the school. Something like PE or art is lovely, kind of low demand. It's often PE is obviously outside. If you've got your kids who love being outside, it's a nice option. They can kind of, and I think talking to like, I am just blessed in Derry Wash. I'm absolutely blessed with the principal and the teachers who are so inclusive, and anything I ask them to do, is just no problem. Absolutely all day long. And to be honest, I don't even say anything anymore because I don't need to. They know have done everything in their power to get to know the child. And that is so important too. They've built that relationship. I have one teacher in the school who daily makes a production of a particular child coming into the school, into his class, and she has a particular figurine that she really likes, and he makes this huge production of this figure. Not allowed in here. He's absolutely banned, and my student loves this. I can't explain how much she loves it, and it just causes great crack, and he has enough for doing. He's a load of kids in the class, but every time she comes in, this is what happens, and she is immediately at ease, and she feels welcome, and she feels like she belongs there. Little things like that. So I think if you know what the child is interested in, again, if they like art, why not go up for art? What if they love PE and they love jumping around, energy to burn, into PE with them? You know what I mean? So things like that. That would be my advice. And just to have that kind of, as I said before, I like to go up first to see how it's going and how the child is presenting. If they look like they're okay in the regulation, basically. Some kids need a good, solid regulation break beforehand, to get them ready. Again, there's a part of me that says if they need that before they go in, do they need to be in there, kind of thing. Ideally, if they're going into mainstream, you'd want them sailing in the door and doing their bit and heading off again. Good luck at the door. That's settling and calm. And again, to watch out for any dysregulation or behaviour is concerned when they come down, because the masking could be going on in the class, and then they come down and they're let go. So that'd be the main thing. But again, it comes down to building a relationship. Do you know your kid? Do you know the child? Do they know if you know well if they're not doing okay? So yeah, but not to force it for the sake of it, because that's not worth it, and it's only going to cause more harm than good, in my opinion.
And I suppose that brings me maybe to my final short question. I won't keep you any longer. So this would often come up, I feel, even for myself as a parent over the years. Now, I'm so long on the road, nearly 20 years on the road as a parent. Well, I am actually, because Haley's never mentioned nearly 19, so I am. But I suppose as a parent, if I'm the teacher and I'm meeting parents for the first time, I suppose from my perspective, would it be useful for them to be aware, like the interactions with the parents initially might be very loaded, not for any negative reason. The parents are very apprehensive. This might be their first time ever. They might have children already in the mainstream, might be their first time ever realising that this child needs to go to the autism class. And there's nothing wrong. Like, as I said earlier, Jack, my gorgeous Jack could have had the opportunity with my Max and my Connor to go into mainstream, but I know that isn't a good fit for them. Now, if the school think, maybe for art, maybe for music, fine, but we'll say for some families, mainstream is the option, and there may not be the option for mainstream because it mightn't be a good fit for the child. But we'll say for those parents, when the teacher's interacting with them for the first time, for me, I always think it's useful to say those interactions might be a little bit loaded because the parents are overwhelmed. They're worried. This might be their first experience of autism in their family, their first experience of ever thinking about an autism class, and they might be a little bit afraid and apprehensive. So is there any advice there for teachers to consider about those interactions with families, maybe on those first few weeks, about what's going on? Or even if they find, maybe if I was a parent coming into yourself and I was, saying, God, Elaine, maybe Connor or Jack or Max could have been a mainstream, but they're coming into the autism class. Like, what if I was a parent, do you think, and if you're the teacher now for the first time, what might be useful for the teacher to have in their mind if they're talking to a parent like myself that's a little bit overwhelmed, not sure, maybe a little bit afraid about what's to happen?
Yeah, I feel like 50% of the job is building relationships with the kids, and the other 50 is with the parents, because they are, as I said, parent is always a primary educator regardless of whether the child is autistic or not. And I think at this particular point, parents are, I'm a mammy myself and I'm wrecked, just tired all the time. But, parents of children with complex needs are, I'd say, twice as wrecked, if in my opinion. I think they're also worn out from advocating, for their kids as well. And I'm not saying all, I'm not a blanket statement, but I think you really need to come to that relationship and come to that point with parents with a real sense of, I just keep thinking, I have no idea how they feel. So don't say, I get it, or don't make this kind of like, well, you know, all parents this, all parents that. No, I don't know how they feel, and I'm not going to pretend I do. And I'm just going to come from a place of not understanding, but huge respect for all they do for for their kids, and they are going to be scared, and some are going to be scared and worried and everything. And I think that something very simple to do is invite them into the class so they can see it and see what you can provide. I think as well, for me, it's something I try to do as much as I can late into the evening. Unfortunately, just what works for me is communication, constant communication, and that goes both ways. And I've said that to parents, you know, if he's had a bad night's sleep, I need to know. And if she's, you know, if she's mentioned anything at home that's bothering her, you need to tell me, because they may not tell me in school, or, you know, so that constant back and forth. And I think we use Seesaw in Dairy Wash. We send photos. I try my best. Again, it could be 2:50 when they're after going on the bus that I think to do it, or 2:30, you know. But I think it's so important that they see all the good and the progress. And I like to put videos when I can to see, like, even the progress of language and everything. So they see the benefit of, you know, both the autism class and the mainstream. And I think that there's definitely something to be got from both if that's meaningful for the child. But I think communication is so important. Just respect and total. I'm in awe, honestly, of the parents that I work with and all they do. All day long and all night long and everything. And I have my few hours that I support their kids, and I'm so privileged to do it. But I don't think for one second that I understand, you know, what it is to be a parent. Of kids with complex needs. So I try to come at it from a point of being a mammy, first of all, but then also understanding that I don't understand, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And as I said at the start of this, I suppose today's podcast, I think anyone that's listened thus far, they will definitely agree. You have like buckets of compassion, empathy, but intellect, but also professionalism. So I hope everyone has enjoyed today's podcast. We'll be back again tomorrow onto our next topic. And for anyone that has managed to listen this far, you will be able to find in the description, I suppose, section of this podcast, a link to a very specific part of my website, littlepuddins.ie, where you'll be able to access downloads that myself and Elaine have developed to support you on your journey, I suppose, going into the autism class for the first time. So huge thanks to the absolutely outstanding Elaine for joining me for, I suppose, day one of our mini series. So huge thanks to everyone for listening as well.
Thank you so much.
Bye.